Hello, welcome to another show of Come Back Stronger, where me, Jimmy Fasig, and Dana Brooks, my law partner, we bring you stories mostly from North Florida from people who have overcome challenges, overcome adversity, and have come back stronger. And today,
we got a
Dana,
big one.
We are going to share with you the story of a young woman. Her name is Michele Madison, and she is an incredibly impressive woman. She is 27 years old, changing the world.
That's right.
But Dana, she started off with some serious challenges that she's turned her pain into purpose. She is a perfect example of a phenomenal comeback story. First of all, she had a single mom.
Right.
And she found out at 14, unfortunately, that her mom had suffered from breast cancer.
Yeah.
And so at 14 years old, she had to go and get a job at a grocery store so she could financially support her mom who wasn't able to work. Yes.
That's a lot for any 14-year-old,
Oh,
yeah. But single mom, not a big resource system out there. And this young woman, that's a lot to thrust on anybody at 14, but she just took it and she ran with it, and she's done so much. And believe it or not, this young woman is only in her late 20s right now, like 27.
27 years old.
She's packed in those 13 years, it's like you read about.
So even worse, she finds out that she has Crohn's disease.
Debilitating.
So she can't even finish high school, and she's got to support her mom who's got breast cancer. And this young woman, now at 27, has won the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award.
She's won.
Oh my gosh! Because she has created something that is called what's called aquaponics, farming the future, where she teaches people all across the world, internationally, students, K-12 students, K through 12 students, how to be self-sustainable. So this is really exciting. It's so exciting that we decided that we're going to make this into 2 shows instead of 1. So today you're going to, she's got so much good information. So we're really excited for you to meet Michele Madison. Right now we're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, you're going to see the first section of her interview.
I recently had a new client, and she suffered a mild traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
And she had no idea what had happened that caused her to be injured.
Gotcha.
But it turns out she had fallen into a pit at an oil change station. And it was 100% their fault.
Oh, wow.
But
her injury made her not even understand
her injury, and
how
it makes me so frustrated, because folks that suffer concussions or mild traumatic brain injuries, it's really difficult for them to know what happened and to understand the difference in what their life was and what it is now because of the nature of their condition. And so the insurance companies need to recognize the full value of that.
Instead of taking advantage of that very unique situation.
It took her family telling her, you need to call an attorney. Her family coming with her to the appointment to say, these are the differences, to get her in there, and now we're able to help her.
I love that.
Welcome back to Come Back Stronger, where we are interviewing Michele Madison, who is an absolute game stopper, the winner of the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award because of a program that she started called Farming the Future, which has gone international. She's 27 years old and shaking up the world.
Wow.
Here's the first part of her interview.
Michele Madison, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
I am too. You have such a great story. So, when you were a kid, you were living in a van with your family. When you were 14, you were working. You got knocked down pretty significantly by Crohn's disease, came back from that and started farming the future. You sit here now in a wheelchair today. So we have so much to talk about with your comeback story.
Yes.
So let's start with your childhood and kind of what the backstory is.
So I have a great childhood, I think, because I wouldn't be the person that I am today if it weren't for all of my wonderful experiences. But I grew up with a single mom, which I think is pretty common. And so what happened when I was a little girl was it was me, and I have an older sister, and my mom, and we at one point had a father, and he got a little he had a little bit of a drinking problem, and so when it got too dangerous and it got to the point where financially he had ruined my mother. He took out credit cards in her name. He had invested everything in the stock market, and then Enron crashed. And so my mom did what any strong mom would do, is she packed us up and she said, we're leaving. And that was in South Florida. And she packed us up and moved us into an apartment somewhere that wasn't awesome. And then we ended up having to run away from, because he kind of followed us around for a little bit. And we ended up moving to family in New York, which, my mom didn't have an education. So my mom never went to college. I grew up with my mom sitting by my bed, like me and my sister, saying, Michele, Melissa, you have to go to school. You have to get an education so you never have to live like this. You can never depend on anyone. You can never depend on any man. You have to have an education. So growing up, our whole dream was always to go and get that university degree and the college experience. And I ended up going to 4 different elementary schools, 5 different middle schools, and 5 different high schools.
Wow. And at one point, you didn't really have anywhere to live, right?
Yeah, at one point we had gone from, so after we had lost everything, which I was like 4 or 5, and so we had just pretty much started bouncing between family members. So my mom didn't have an education. She didn't have any money. She didn't have a credit score or anything. So we moved up to New York to stay with, our cousins in New York. And then that ended up, ending kind of sourly. And all of a sudden one day we're packing up in this Jeep and driving back down to Florida. Then we stayed with my aunt, and then in Delray Beach. And then we stayed with another aunt in Jupiter. And then my other aunt bought a townhome so we could stay with her.
So a lot of bouncing around.
A lot of bouncing around.
Yeah.
A lot of bouncing around, and a lot of learning how to be resourceful and how to adapt.
And I think you did that pretty well when I think your mom had breast cancer and you had to start working, right?
So, so when I was in middle school, things were finally starting to look up. It was, oh man, my mom bought a townhouse. Finally, she built her credit score up. She was so excited. She had a job. She qualified. She bought a townhouse. So I didn't have to stay with my cousin anymore, and I was going to go to a better school. And then, almost immediately, as soon as we closed on the townhome, my mom, she was like, hey, Shelly, there's something that I have to tell you. And I was like, yeah, what's up? And she's like, I have stage 4 breast cancer. But don't worry, nobody dies from breast cancer anymore. It escalated really quickly. She ended up going in, I was 12 or 13 at the time, and she had to go in for an emergency double mastectomy. So it was stage 4 breast cancer, and it was actually a malpractice lawsuit, because she had found it 2 years before. And it was very clearly cancer, and they just told her it was nothing. So she ended up losing her job, and really quickly, because she got really sick. And we ended up, I actually moved into her room because we had to rent out my room to a woman and her son, because we couldn't afford to keep paying the mortgage.
Wow.
So I moved into my mom's room, and I was my mom's caretaker. And my mom tried to have reconstruction surgery, but it kept failing. So I would be cleaning her wounds, and her breast would rip open, and the expander would fall. It was really bad. And
you were 14 then?
I was 13, about to turn 14. So I was in 7th and 8th grade. I was in 7th grade when it first started. And so on my 14th birthday, I woke up, and my mom drove me to Publix in Wellington Town Square. And I went in and I filled out the application and I immediately asked to speak to the manager. And I got a job on my 14th birthday, and I was bagging groceries at Publix.
That's amazing.
And so I would go to school, and then I would go to Publix, and I would work, and then I would come home. And then it was funny because like the utilities place was actually located behind our the commons area or whatever was behind our townhome. So I would actually even walk over to the utilities place and I would pay the utility bill.
It's a lot of responsibility at such a young age.
It is. And, you know, it's interesting because I'm so good at dealing with those awful phone calls when you have to go to like Verizon and be on the phone with them forever, you know, and like all of the hoops that they make you jump through.
You learned at a very early age.
I did. I learned at a really early age, and you're not going to get over on me on that extra charge. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to stick through this phone call.
When we come back, I want to talk about high school and the challenges you faced in high school, especially with Crohn's disease.
Excellent.
Wow.
What an impressive young woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to get over on her.
I'm going to hire her to
Oh my
talk to the
gosh.
people when I get those mysterious little extra charges in my bill. I love that though, but she understood how precious her resources that she knew about were. And
Yeah.
they didn't have, you know, $7.95 for nonsense to spend just so they can have a phone and have access to health care and family and all the things that they needed to make sure their survival continued. And then also her mother got the health care that she needed. But this is quite an impressive young woman. That's a lot to take on. And think about this, while you're trying to do it, you're trying to go to school, you're also working, you're trying to show these people, these employers, that they did the right thing by taking a chance on a 14-year-old. So you're way outside your coverage
depth,
on that.
sure.
And then she's got strangers living in her home. You know, another person and a child. Can you imagine trying to care for someone who you fear is dying? It's the only thing you've got, your lifeline. You're so worried about that, and then you've got to somehow
You got to support.
welcome
you have to
other strangers in
support
your
her,
house
have
and turn
strangers.
into a funding source. How could you even think about it?
I'll tell you what, my favorite thing that she said that just is so impressive to me is she said she had a wonderful childhood. And she said, I wouldn't be the person I am today if it weren't for all my wonderful experiences. That,
that's
the
a blessing
choice
to
of
her mother.
words
That's a
is
blessing to her mother.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it's the bottom, it is a critical element of every comeback story, which is where you become actually grateful for the challenges you face because you turn that pain into purpose.
And you become the narrator of your own story.
You become
and
the
you
narrator
decide,
of your own story.
and
Boy,
you decide this is a good childhood.
100%.
Because it could be so much worse.
and I'll tell you what, she's got a lot more story to tell. So we're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to hear the second part of Michele Madison's interview.
You know what's funny? When law firms advertise that they'll give a free consultation, every consultation we give is free, unless we can get you a settlement based on your injuries.
Right.
Every time you give me a call, it's free.
Yeah.
I want you to give me a call.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to charge you unless we actually get you something for your case.
That's right. You don't have to pay me anything unless I win the case.
Right.
And on top of that, I'm going to pay for all of the court costs and the deposition costs and medical records costs and expert opinions costs. All of that's coming out of my pocket. And if we don't win the case, then we eat those costs at no charge to you.
Right. So we don't take a case we don't believe in because it's not in our interest.
Right.
And we don't minimize or devalue your case because that's also not in our interest.
Right.
So it makes everything fair.
If you have a lawyer on a contingency fee, you can hire the very best lawyer.
Welcome back to Come Back Stronger, where we've been interviewing Michele Madison. This young woman is so impressive. She started off with, at 14 years old, a single mom who had breast cancer. She had to take care of her mom, had to get a job. Then she finds out she has Crohn's disease, and then she, now 27 years old, and she is shaking up the world. You're about to hear the second part of her interview.
All right, so when you were in high school, is that when you were diagnosed with Crohn's disease?
So, yes, which was almost nearly impossible. All of a sudden, it was like we didn't know what was wrong, and they just kept giving me more antibiotics. But I was still like really, really sick, and I couldn't go back to school. I missed weeks of school, and finally I was hospitalized. And when I was hospitalized was when they were like, they found all of the different markers and all of the all the inflammatory markers, and we had kind of just been through it with my sister, and we were like, hey, this is Crohn's disease. And it still took about 1.5 to 2 years for them to diagnose me with Crohn's.
That's a long time.
It was a really long time.
I think a lot of people are not familiar with Crohn's. So could you explain a little bit about what Crohn's disease is and how it impacts you?
So Crohn's disease is an autoimmune disease that is an invisible illness. It's a digestive disorder, and so essentially my body doesn't really like to digest food very well, and I have an overactive immune system.
It's very painful, right?
It's really painful. It's typically in your intestines is where it's normally where you get the most ulcers and inflammation and bleeding.
I can't even imagine having that in high school. I mean, I can't imagine having it at all because it's so hard for people, especially because you don't look like you're sick.
No.
You know, so it's hard to understand for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Did that derail you from ultimately going to college and doing the medical school thing?
So I ended up not being able to graduate high school like a regular person. My senior year, I was in and out of the hospital so much that even though my grades were really good, my attendance was so bad and I just couldn't keep up with it. So I ended up having to graduate from a program called Hospital Homebound, which is where you take your classes over the phone while it's on speakerphone.
Wow.
So my dream of getting to go away to university and, you know, stay in a dorm and get that college degree, I never got to take the SATs or the ACTs.
So you started at TCC, right?
I ended up, I wanted to go to FSU.
Yeah.
And so I ended up coming up here by myself, not really knowing anybody, and going into a random housing thing and going to TCC and trying to so that way I could, transfer.
So what is Farming the Future and how did all that get started?
I couldn't actually afford to go to college. Turns out it's really expensive. And I was not prepared for that. And I had been working my whole life. I was at this point, I'm 18, 19, so I'm, serving tables and bartending and stuff. But I also, have Crohn's disease and I'm in and out of the hospital. So at one point, I literally could not afford to go to TCC, and I had gotten sick, so I was in the hospital. So I went to the school and I was like, listen guys, I'm telling you, I'm so smart. Give me a chance, just give me a scholarship. If I could just go to school and not have to worry about, if I could go to school and just not have to worry about working while going to school and paying for all of that, it's just, I'm so smart, I promise you. And they said, we're sorry, we have nothing to go off of.
Oh, that's a gut punch.
So, Farming the Future started off as my way of trying to get a scholarship to go to TCC.
What is Farming the Future?
Farming the Future is a wonderful for-profit company that does K-12 science education. What we specialize in is we use agriculture to teach the required science concepts in schools, where they, depending on what program they get their own individual grow kit with an LED grow light that they can have on their desk.
Cool.
And instead of just reading about photosynthesis, they can actually run experiments of what happens if we change the temperature, what happens if we mess with these variables. And so all of a sudden, instead of putting this big fat textbook of science in front of these kids,
it's hands-on.
It's hands-on, and it's applicable learning. It's useful skills. It's 21st century application.
So you're teaching kids how to grow food too. Be so self-sustaining, really.
Exactly. So it's what's really cool about what I do. Well, what we do is that we're not just teaching kids to garden, and we're not just teaching kids to farm, and we're not just teaching kids science. I think I truly believe that the reason why I am where I am and I have had the success that I have had is because I didn't have a lot of resources. Because when you don't have resources, you're going to be resourceful.
Right.
And if we give these kids the opportunity to apply that resourcefulness and creativity to STEM fields, that's how we're going to revolutionize everything.
It's a beautiful thing.
That's how we're going to get green technology.
So what was the reason for the humanitarian award? Was it because of Farming the Future, or was it something else that you've done? You got to be humble and talk about yourself and talk about your award because it's so amazing. I mean, it's the Muhammad Ali Award. That's incredible.
It really was. It was really, really amazing. I was really lucky.
Yeah.
And they had found me through actually another award that I had won, the NAAEE, which is the North American Association for Environmental Educators, which is it's like a international environmental educator award.
Cool.
And they had found me on their 30 under 30 list, and a lot of it, I had to like provide them with like documentation and stuff like that, and
because what you're doing is going nationwide and probably worldwide. It's not just here.
It's not just here.
It's spreading.
And I've had the amount of reach that I have had even before the last 3 years. I mean, the reach that I have had of me just going and doing it. I mean, it's literally me, just myself. I've educated, I think that over like in person more than once, like over like 27,000 students.
Wow.
That at one point in time I was running full programs in a different school every day of the week for the entire year.
I think you had gotten yourself a real world education, right?
Yeah. I was I remember I was 24 flying out to Missouri to build a commercial hydroponics facility.
Michele, this has been so fascinating, but we've got to go to a quick break.
Wow, Dana. I got to tell you, I'm anxious to share my thoughts on this.
Yeah. Let me hear about it.
This is a young woman who she loses her father, leaves, and so her mother has breast cancer. She's constantly saying the mantra, you've got to be resourceful. You've got to depend on yourself. You can't depend on a man.
Right.
You can't depend on anybody. And she took that pain and she turned it into a purpose where now she's teaching everybody, 27,000 students, to be resourceful, to take care of themselves, to be able to depend on themselves through farming, through agriculture, and not only that, this is my favorite quote. My favorite quote is, by being resourceful, that's how we're going to revolutionize the world.
She's exactly right, because we talk about this a lot. People will come to us. We have young people who work with us. You and I mentor young people, and you can tell them these things, all these platitudes. But telling somebody to be resourceful without telling them how to be resourceful,
right?
Telling somebody to be resilient without telling them how to be resilient, you might as well be just speaking into the wind.
She's showing them.
She's just like, let me just find out what it is. And my belief is always that we have more resources than we believe.
Yes.
We need to take inventory of them, but then we need to take the next step and tap into them. And a lot of times you do need to reach out to a mentor to help you do that. You're not born knowing how. I don't know how she knew how. I'm impressed with her though, and especially in light of it, I would imagine with her a lot of it is, what other option do I have?
Right.
I have to
She
do this.
had to become resourceful. She was thrown into the fire, and what I always like to say is, the only way you can know what you're really made of is to jump into the fire.
To see where you have no other option.
Yeah,
than to
and in
find
this
out.
case, she was thrown into the fire. She rose to the occasion, and she is just an impressive woman. So we're going to go to another commercial break, and then when we come back, we're going to wrap it up with some takeaways about Michele Madison's interview.
I went to lunch with one of my former clients the other day, and she's doing great. She took the money from her settlement and she started her own company buying and selling vehicles, which is really cool because she was in a car crash and then needed a new vehicle. And so now she's able to help other folks out.
most of our clients, they find that one of the most frustrating things is the dealing with the vehicle.
Oh, well, losing your car can totally disrupt your life.
You could lose your livelihood over it. If you can't get to work, or you know, what's the worst thing with our clients is we're just trying to help them get well, but if they can't get to the health care that they need, you know, that's just another setback.
One of the typical things about a comeback story is you take the pain and the struggles and the challenges that you've been through and you use that as the fire that kind of motivates you to do something good for other people.
Yeah.
And so I love that because now our client did exactly that, like literally to the T.
Welcome back to Come Back Stronger, where we just heard the first two parts of an interview with Michele Madison, she started off her life with a single mom who had breast cancer. At 14, she had to get a job to take care of her mom. She ends up with Crohn's disease and learning to be resourceful, and she ended up creating a company called Farming the Future that has literally changed the world. She's taught internationally, 27,000 students. She's shaking up the world, but I'll tell you what, this young woman, I think, is the epitome of a comeback story.
Oh.
What did you think?
I totally agree. And you know, so many times people do these things, these insurmountable things and odds, and they conquer them and they go on to help other people, but they have some nudging, or they have a break, or there's somebody who comes along and says, I believe in you, and does it. I'm not hearing that from her so far. It just seems like she just got her nose bloodied every step of the way. And you know, I just saw the last ad about how important somebody's automobile is to them. It's their livelihood, but to this young woman and her family, her mother, that was their home.
Yeah.
For a period of time. Just think about that. You live in a van, and you are now the grown-up, and you need to take care of the one person in your world thought would always be there to take care of you, and that is your mom. That's quite a reality for a young person.
100%. My biggest takeaway, Dana, was this young woman learned to think big, and she's changing the world, and she's got a purpose of changing the world. That's what I love about her. That's what a good comeback story is all about. Thank you for tuning in today, and we will look forward to next week where we bring you the second part of the interviews with Michele Madison.
And you know what the insurance company offered him? $5,000.
Really?
He's completely blind, and they offer him $5,000. Ask him to sign a release.
To a lot of people, especially when they're hurting and when they're down and when they're vulnerable, $5,000 is a life-changing amount of money.
Yeah.
And they're not looking at the value of what has been lost. They're not looking at what it would take to make that person whole, which is our job.
Yeah.
That's our job. Their job isn't. Their job is to save the insurance company money.
Right.
And they look at this person and they go, I bet $5,000 would get your full attention. Right. And they come in and they dangle it with a settlement release, and then once you sign it, you're done. You can't come back to us and ask us to wave a magic wand and make that go away. That can't go away.
My client didn't accept the $5,000. We took him all the way to trial. We got a $5 million verdict.